So yeah, these are the commonly misunderstood or commonly difficult research methods topics. So we're looking at like writing research hypotheses. So even this year, like some of you still kind of find operationalizing variables kind of confusing, and operationalizing means like writing a variable in terms of how it's being measured. Some people still get confused between what a sampling procedure is and what a research design is. So like if you're asked to identify an experimental design, some of you don't know what's meant by that, or you'd ask, okay, what do you mean by a research design? So we have to know what these terms are. We have to know that if we're ever asked in a question to identify a sampling procedure, we're basically being asked to identify how were the participants selected for the study? Was it through convenient sampling? Was it through random sampling? Was it through stratified sampling? So those are kind of like your options there. With the research designs, we've got three main options that we look at. So basically, was it an independent groups design that was used to organize the participants? Was it a repeated measures design, or was it a matched participants design? So you guys just need to be familiar with what these keywords are and what kind of concepts come under them. So research design, you've got the three main types of research designs. Sampling procedure, you've got the three main ways in which participants are sampled or selected for a study. The next thing we're looking at, or the next thing that is commonly misunderstood that you guys should probably practice and revise, is the standard deviation, understanding that the standard deviation is a measure of variation. So the higher your standard deviation is, technically the less reliable your results would be, because we don't want to have a set of results and have a lot of variation within that set of results. We want to have a set of results where there's very little variation, because what that suggests to us is that there's less potential confounding variables at play. Okay, if you've got a really high standard deviation of results that you've calculated from a study, obviously you are going to have more potential confounding variables other than the IV, more of those unwanted variables at play for those results there. And that's something we never want when it comes to our results of a study. Also, when it comes to potential confounding variables, I feel like most of you are really good at identifying the potential confounding variables. Like if you look at a research scenario, you can say, okay, there was more females than males. That could be a potential confounding variable. Or that the researcher didn't control for alcohol tolerance levels in a study looking at the effect of alcohol on driving ability. Okay, a lot of you can identify this, but when it comes to explaining, okay, how can we now control for those potential confounding variables, that's where we kind of encounter some difficulty. So knowing that, for example, if you've got a repeated measures design, one potential confounding variable exclusive to repeated measures design, we know is the order effect. Okay, you not only need to know that, but you also need to know how can we control for the order effect, that there's a procedure called counterbalancing that can be used to control for order effect. Similarly, if you're using a placebo treatment, a lot of the time, a placebo treatment can, be related to the placebo effect. So what is a procedure that we can use to get rid of the placebo effect? And that's the single blind procedure. Okay, so all of these are in the study design, they're in the research methods PowerPoint, but we just need to make sure we can connect the dots and understand that, yep, if we encounter this potential confounding variable, what is one way in which we can now control for or manage that confounding variable? Evaluating generalizability of results is really important. This is you basically looking at a set of results that you've obtained from a research study or research scenario and being able to say, okay, the results are generalized, can be generalized back to the population, or they can't be generalized, and then give reasons why. Most of the time, you have to look at the sampling technique. Remember, if convenient sampling is used in a particular study, there is no way that you can generalize results. Why? Because the sample does not represent the population, because not everyone had an equal chance of being selected. Obviously, if we use random sampling instead, that brings us one step closer to actually being able to generalize the results. But having said that, generalizability of results, or the extent to which results can be generalized, it's not only dependent on the sampling technique that you use, it's also dependent on other potential confounding variables, were there any ethical breaches, were there any limitations with the setup of the study, were there non-standardized instructions and procedures, like experimenter 1 spoke nicely to the first group and gave the instructions in a clear way, but for the group number 2, they really rushed everything and they didn't explain the proper study in the proper way. So again, there's a lot of variables that can affect generalizability of results. And in most cases, it is difficult to say with confidence that yes, we can confidently generalize the results, because generalizability of results is something that is very easily affected by all these other limitations. Knowing the difference between reliability and validity of results. Remember, we said that the standard deviation can affect the reliability and validity of results. Other factors as well, like potential confounding variables, again, these can affect your reliability and your validity of results. And remember, reliability, and we did talk about this when we did the research methods PowerPoint, but reliability is your ability to do the study over multiple trials, trial number 1, trial number 2, do it over multiple attempts and more or less get the same results each time. Validity is talking about the actual tools that you're using to measure a variable in a study. It's not really relating to the consistency of results. Okay, so reliability is related to the consistency of results, whether we're getting the same kind of results or more or less the same each time. Validity is related to the properties of the tool that we're using. So to give you an example, if I am calculating the effect of a low carbohydrate diet on fat loss in healthy adults, obviously my DV in that case would be fat loss, okay? How much fat is being lost by each person in terms of kilograms. Now, one way that I can measure that fat loss, or a tool that I can use to measure it, would be a weighing scale, okay? A weighing scale will give us an accurate indication of how much weight that person has lost. In this case, using a waist circumference as a measure wouldn't really give us a clear idea of how much weight a person has lost. It will tell us how much centimeters they've lost, but in terms of actual percentage fat loss, we'd need one of those high-tech weighing scales that tell you body fat percentage and stuff. So again, having that specific correct tool that will allow you to measure that variable correctly allows you to have good validity for your study. And the last thing, and we are going to look at a practice question related to this today, is drawing conclusions. And we call them evidence-based conclusions because you're not just drawing your own conclusion based on your own opinion. You're looking at the data or the results that you're given in the actual scenario or in the case study in the exam. And you're basically drawing a conclusion. That means you're describing a conclusion that we can make based on that given set of results or evidence or data that they've given you, okay? Whether that's just in the form of a table, whether that's in the form of a graph, you're interpreting those results and drawing a conclusion for the study based on those results. Okay, so do you guys have any topics that you're confused about or that you want me to go through again with reference to research methods? You can either put it in the chat box now, or if you think of it halfway through as I'm going through this PowerPoint, just put it in the chat box. I'll address it at some point, either in the middle or maybe towards the end. Alrighty, so what we're doing today is obviously because it's exam revision, I just wanted to, you know, maybe work with you guys through a few multiple choice and then if one of the research scenarios from last year's exam. So this is the first one. So it says, Dr. Rogers gathers a sample of ECE psychology students who have reported feeling stressed due to their forthcoming exams. In order to reduce stress levels, he has half the participants carry out 4 hours of exercise a week, whilst the other half practice deep relaxation techniques for 4 hours a week. He assesses their stress level via responses to a questionnaire at the end of the week. So I'm going to give you guys, we've got 3 multiple choices here, but they're not too long. I'll probably give you guys 2 minutes. Let's try and challenge ourselves. So I'm going to put 2 minutes on the clock for you guys to just write down the options for this particular multiple choice here. All right, so 2 minutes on the clock starts now. Okay, so looking at this question now, question 60, it says, what is the independent variable in this study? So remember, the IV is the variable that we're manipulating. It's usually, if we talk about an experiment as being a cause-effect relationship, the IV is the cause component. It's basically what we're manipulating or changing in the study. So if we look at the IV in this study, your answer should have been B, okay? And it's B because that's what we're getting the participants to do. That's what we're getting the participants to do. That's the essential, in this case, the experimental treatment. It's the experimental variable that they're being exposed to. Okay, so whether students exercise for 4 hours a week or practice relaxation techniques for 4 hours a week, that is our, that's our basic IV. Question 61 says, what is the dependent variable? Now, the dependent variable, remember, is the effect component. So if we talk about an experiment as being a cause-effect relationship, the dependent variable is the effect. Okay, so we're manipulating the IV now to get some effect on the DV, and the DV is the variable that we're measuring for change. So in this case, if we look at the scenario, it says he assesses their stress level via responses to a questionnaire at the end of the week. So your answer should have been C. Okay, that student stress levels at the end of the week is what Dr. Rogers was measuring for change. That's the DV. Question 62 says, what kind of experimental design is used in the study? Remembering that we've only got three experimental designs. If you knew what the experimental designs were, you would have automatically eliminated option D, knowing that that is not an example of a design. Obviously, the best answer for this would be C, independent groups. It's independent groups because each person is in a separate group. There are two clear separate groups. One group is obviously doing the exercise. One group is doing the deep relaxation technique. So there's two clear groups. There's no indication that the same participants are being used across both groups. Okay, it just says half the participants carry out 4 hours of exercise a week, whilst the other half, okay, it doesn't say that those same half of participants then engage in the deep relaxation techniques. There is some indication here that there are different participants being used, two clear separate groups, which means that option C is the best option there. So hopefully that was pretty straightforward. If you guys have any questions though, with reference to that, just let me know in the chat box. All right, moving on to the next question. So this one is another case study. Don't worry about the statistical significance value at the end. We don't cover p-values anymore and they're not examinable content anymore. So just don't worry about the p-value, just read the rest of the case study. I'm gonna give you about 3 minutes to do this one because you do need to, probably not 3 actually, maybe that's too much, maybe 2.5 minutes. Let's try to challenge ourselves today. Okay, so 2.5 minutes on the clock to read this case study and answer this one question here. And your time starts now. So yeah, when we're looking at this question here, it's just about basically choosing what specific design, research design was chosen by Dr. Matthews, and then also explaining what were the types of studies, okay? We call them types of studies that he used to collect data, okay? Types of studies used to collect data. So your best answer in this case should have been D, an independent groups design. It's an independent groups design because again, there's two clear separate groups. It says group A received counseling, while group B did not. So there's a clear experimental group there, which is group A, and a clear control group. Again, there's no indication in the case study that suggests that there were the same participants going through both conditions. So we can't choose it as being a repeated measures design. We can't choose a matched participants because obviously the participants aren't being matched in terms of characteristics. In fact, one group has trauma, the other group doesn't. So they're as dissimilar from each other as they could be. So the best option left for us is essentially option D. Okay, self-report is used because remember, an interview, a structured interview is actually an example of a self-report. Okay, questionnaires are an example of a self-report in the sense that the participant is the one who's in control of the responses. So in an interview, you know, you could lie. In a questionnaire that you're writing down answers to, you could lie, you could falsify information. And that's why that's one of the issues with a self-report as well. The observational study is because after the trial period is done, it says that Dr. Matthews compared the measurements from the beginning of the trial with those at the end of the 5-month period. So she's observing the results and observing changes in the symptoms of distress. So that's why option D is the best option there. Alrighty, hopefully you guys got option D as well. So we'll move on to the next question. So the next one is a bit everywhere. So I've got 11 here, 12, and then 13. Alrighty, I'm going to give you guys, and this is related to sleep. So it's a topic that we've already done in Unit 4. So let me just put 3 minutes on the clock. I think that should be enough. All right, so your 3 minutes to read through this case study and answer these 3 multiple choice starts now. So when we're looking at this question, you have to remember that the University Ethics Committee has basically told Professor Plum that you can't deliberately force people to be sleep deprived. And so this is kind of following on to our first question, which is which research design would most effectively reduce participant related variables given the constraints made by the Ethics Committee? So I'll just show you guys the answer first. Now, given that the Ethics Committee has said that Professor Plum cannot deliberately impose students or impose sleep deprivation on students, what's the best research design? Now, we know in general, one of the best research designs to reduce individual participant differences, which is what participant-related variables means, is matched participants design, right? It is a time-consuming design compared to independent groups, but it allows us to make sure that the participants are matched on a specific variable. So rather than getting a bunch of people who have healthy sleep patterns, forcing them to sleep deprive themselves, what we're doing is we're getting participants who are already quite sleep deprived in general, because maybe they work late, maybe that's just the way they sleep, that's their lifestyle. We're getting a bunch of participants who are already sleep deprived, so we don't have to go on to harm them further by forcing them to sleep deprive themselves, if that makes sense, because they already, by their very nature in normal life, are sleep deprived. They only get 3-4 hours of sleep a night. That's just who they are. Okay, so this would obviously not infringe on any ethical principles because the people are already sleep deprived to begin with. We're not taking them into the experiment and sleep depriving them further. So that's why the best option there would be a matched participants design. Now, what sampling method is Professor Plum using? As you were reading through this scenario, you would have realized that the way that Professor Plum has actually, recruited these participants is through an ad. Okay, whenever we talk about an ad being posted in a newsletter or on a building or, participants volunteering to take part, that's always going to be convenient sampling. Okay, if you're trying to recruit people into your study using an advertisement, that's obviously going to be people who want to volunteer to be in that study. Okay, so that's going to be convenient sampling, pretty straightforward there. Question 13, what would the dependent variable be? So what is Professor Plum measuring for change? What is the effect that Professor Plum is looking for in terms of her results? So it says that she predicts that students who maintain regular sleep times will have lower levels of stress. So regular sleep time should be our IV, and what she's measuring for change is the stress level. So let's look at which option is most relevant to that. So we've got average amount of sleep per night, stress levels, reduction in stress levels, regularity of sleep patterns. Now, why is it option B and not option C? The reason it's option B is because when we're phrasing a dependent variable, when we're actually writing it out, we can't say that reduced stress levels is the DV. We can't put a description, like a descriptive wording to it, like increased or decreased or reduced or enhanced or stuff like that, because we don't know what the DV is going to be, okay? In fact, there might not be a reduction in stress levels. Maybe the increased sleep deprivation or decreased sleep deprivation will actually lead to an increase in stress levels. So whenever we're phrasing a DV, we have to phrase it in a very general kind of way without attaching an amount to it. Obviously, when we're writing a hypothesis, we will obviously talk about the direction of effect, whether the DV is going to increase or decrease, because that's a prediction. When you're simply asked to state or identify the DV, though, just be careful in the sense that we have to state it generally without attaching any kind of amount to it. Alrighty, so that is that question there. So hopefully you guys understood what was expected there. And if there's any issues with this question, just let me know in the chat box. All right, moving on to the next question. So this one is looking at a research hypothesis. So I'm going to let you guys read this research hypothesis and, read this research scenario and then basically understand what the research hypothesis could be. So choose the best research hypothesis based on this scenario. So I'm going to give you guys maybe like 2 minutes to do this one. So 2 minutes on the clock and your time starts now. So when we're looking at this question, we have to remember that what does a research hypothesis generally include? So we use the memory tip iPod to remember. So we've got the IV, you've got the population, you've got the operationalizing of the IV and DV, and then you've got the actual DV itself. So if we're going to look through all of these research hypotheses now, and I'll just show you guys the answer before we do that. So the answer is C, so you can tick yourself off. Now, the reason that the answer is C is that it can't be A because A actually discusses the sample. Remember that we can't attach a number to the population. The minute we attach a number to the population, that is no longer the population, that is the sample. So it can't be option A or D because automatically we can see that these two are expressing the hypothesis in terms of the sample, not the population. The population is always very generally stated, never has a number of participants attached to it. So the only two options we have are essentially B and C. Now, the reason why it's not B is if we read through Victorian primary school children who use mnemonic devices during science classes will recall scientific facts more than Victorian primary school children who do not use mnemonic devices. So the reason that it's not B is obviously because the DV has not been operationalized correctly. Okay, so in this case, it should be C because it says Victorian primary school children who use mnemonic devices during science classes will score higher in a multiple choice test. That's the way that we were operationalizing the IV, if I can just get my pen. Okay, so that's the way that we were operationalizing the DV, sorry, okay? We were testing them on multiple choice questions. Option B doesn't talk anything about multiple choice questions, okay? So that's why it can't be option B because the DV is not operationalized correctly. It can be option C because we've got a nice population there. We've got a clear stating of the IV. We've got a clear stating of the DV, and those IV and DV have been operationalized, and the control group, which is Victorian primary school children who do not use mnemonic devices, has been clearly acknowledged. So that's why the best option should be C. So hopefully most of you got that answer. Again, it's just a matter of just checking off that checklist, okay? iPod, remember that memory tip and just checking off to make sure that that the correct answer you've chosen includes or basically reflects all those 4 components there. Alrighty, so remember, it's not just about being able to choose a research hypothesis. You could just as easily be asked to construct a research hypothesis or write a research hypothesis in the short answer section, okay? And so essentially, again, it's just about going through the case study, getting the correct components out of it, like the population, the IVDV, and just putting it all together in that same format that we've been using for hypotheses all year. Alrighty, so moving on to the next, okay, we're up to the research scenario. That's good. Okay, so this is the research scenario from the VCAR 2019 exam, which was last year's exam. It's not a very difficult research scenario, but again, research methods is one of those areas that is commonly not answered well or answered poorly throughout the state. So I just thought we'll just go through it just to give you guys an idea of what a recent research methods question looks like from a VCAR exam. Okay, so this is question 5 from last year's exam, and it says Year 12 student Steph was concerned about the possible adverse impacts that staying up late to study might have on the ability of drivers who are on their learner permit or probationary driver license, on their Ls or on their Ps, to accurately perceive visual stimuli while driving. To investigate this, Steph conducted research as described below, and this is basically setting out what she did in her study. So the participants are 20 people over the age of 18, from Steph's school community who volunteered to participate. Now, that should probably set off some bells in your head, because when we see the word volunteer, let me do that again. I always end up crossing the word out. Okay, volunteered relates to what type of sampling? Convenience sampling. So it's got to be convenience sampling. So straight away, just make a little note of this in your exam book or in your head when you're doing a question like this. So that it's easier for you to kind of come back and interpret the information when you're actually doing the questions. Okay, the method. So how was the experiment actually carried out? So on day 1, participants experienced 1 night of natural sleep and completed a computer-based visual perception test at 9 a.m. the following morning. The test involved identifying 30 letters of varying sizes displayed for brief periods. And day 2, the participants were required to sleep for only 4 hours in total over a 24-hour period, and they completed a similar computer-based visual perception test at 9 a.m. the following morning. So again, you can clearly see that on day 1, they're going in with natural sleep, which means that their normal sleep patterns unchanged, no sleep deprivation. Day 2, you can see that this is the control group, which is not experiencing sleep. They're only being asked to sleep for 4 hours. So there's some level of sleep deprivation on the second day there. They're still doing the same tasks at the same time, and they have to do the same tasks at the same time, because then only can we make a true comparison of the results there. Okay, so then they've given us a results table, figure 1, just a simple bar graph. So showing you the y-axis and the x-axis. On the x-axis, you can see that it's about the sleep conditions. Can't even do an x here. Okay, that's the x-axis, and the y-axis is showing us some level of percentage there. Okay, and in order for us to understand what is on the x-axis and y-axis, we must read the caption. A lot of students skip this. They don't read it because they don't think it's important. It is important. It will give you the answer to most of your questions relating to results. So the results were recorded and collated as the mean percentage of letters accurately identified. We thought the y-axis had a percentage. What is the percentage talking about? It's talking about the mean percentage of letters accurately identified. This is so important. And this was a question. This was actually directly related to a question, which we'll look at in a few seconds. Okay, so basically that is the results. Okay, always make sure you read every part of this research scenario. Highlight certain parts that seem important to you. Don't just look at it and just go to the question, okay? Actually pick it out, unpack it, look at it properly, analyze it properly. Okay, so let's look at the first question now. And the first question is, what would be an appropriate label for the vertical axis of figure 1? What does vertical mean? Vertical means the, going kind of straight up. Okay, vertical axis means the y-axis. If we go back to figure 1, what is our y-axis? It's the one with the percentages. What was the percentages about? It was about the mean percentage of letters accurately identified. Wasn't it? Yes, it was. Although many students didn't look at that properly last year and ended up getting 0.4 average out of 1, which is really kind of tragic because the answer was right there in front of them. They only had to look at it properly and read it and write that answer there. Literally all I've done is copy pasted that answer directly from the research scenario. It literally says, and I'm going to underline it again because I just find it so funny how everyone missed it. Mean percentage of letters accurately identified. It's literally there in front of you. All you had to do was copy and paste it directly into the box that they'd given you. It's worth only 1 mark, but honestly, you know, if you're losing marks on a lot of 1 mark questions, then it's going to add up at the end of the day. So you can see that 59% of students last year got 0 out of 1 for this. So that either means they left it blank or they wrote something that was completely unrelated to the actual expected answer. Now, obviously, in order to get the full 1 mark for this question, it wasn't just about writing percentage of letters accurately identified. You had to be specific. You had to say the mean percentage of letters that were accurately identified. If you just wrote percentage of letters, let's say if you just wrote an answer like this, let's get rid of the word mean. You just wrote percentage of letters that were accurately identified. Nah, that's a 0 because you haven't mentioned the unit of measurement as a percentage. Sorry, not the unit of measurement. You haven't referred to the descriptive statistic that was clearly used in the scenario, which is the mean, okay? So just remember, you have to read every part of that scenario or case study that they give you. Yes, good question. So the question was, there's no half marks given in BCA exams. Yeah, that's correct. There's no half marks given in BCA exams. So in a SAC situation, if you'd written something like this, yeah, we would give you half a mark out of 1. And I know that a lot of schools do give half marks in SACs, but in the VCA exam, it's either 0 or it's a 1. So you have to be really careful with the way that you word your answers. So yeah, no half marks in VCA exams. Alrighty, moving on to the next question. So I'm gonna maybe get you guys to do this yourself. So I'll probably put like 3 minutes on the clock. You don't have to write a full answer, just jot down what you might include. So it said Steph chose not to include adolescents under the age of 18 in her research because they might be experiencing a circadian rhythm phase disorder. Identify and describe the likely circadian phase disorder experienced by adults under the age of 18. So we have learned this. This is a topic we have learned. It's not a topic that's been removed for this year. So I'm going to give you guys 3 minutes now to write a possible answer for this question, and then I'll display a sample one. So 3 minutes on the clock and your time starts now. So before we go through the answer, I'll just answer a question that's been put up. So what's APA reporting conventions? If it's relating to the report, do we need to know how to write up a report for the exam? Generally, we learn the APA reporting conventions mainly because of, you know, the outcome 3 SAC that we do, the big SAC, the research poster. We learn it for that. That doesn't mean that you can't be asked about it in an exam situation. Like you might be asked, for example, really simple questions, like things that you would be able to answer. Like, you know, if someone does a research scenario, if someone does a research experiment or research investigation and they've got a graph, they might ask you, okay, under which section of the research report would the graph go? And you would write results section. Or if they ask you to talk about the participants or the composition of participants, under which section would that information go? So you would say method. It's just like that kind of information that you would be expected to know. They're not going to ask you to write up a report for the exam. Again, with the 10-mark question though, the 10-mark question could be research methods or could be content-based. They still wouldn't ask you to write up a report. Maybe they'd ask you to talk about the discussion section. So maybe talking about some limitations of the research scenario they've given you, but it wouldn't be a full research report because you can't cover a full research report, even in a 10-mark question. Okay, so that's basically the limits of what you would have to do. Yeah. Alrighty, so looking at this question now, so it says Steph chose, yeah, I've already read this question before. So identify and describe the likely circadian phase disorder experienced by adolescents under the age of 18. So this one should have been pretty easy for all of you. It's basically the sleep-wake cycle shift. And the sleep-wake cycle shift has different names depending on which textbook you use. We refer to it as the sleep-wake cycle shift. Other accepted terms for this disorder are delayed sleep phase onset, adolescent phase delay, or adolescent sleep onset disorder. So these are also accepted names used by other textbooks. Again, you get 1 mark for mentioning the name. So sleep-wake cycle shift, you got 1 mark already. Then you get 1 mark for briefly describing what it means. It doesn't ask you to outline, it doesn't ask you to explain, it just asks you to describe. So you don't even have to bring in the discussion of melatonin being released later. And as you can see down here, it says, As only 1 mark was allocated for the description, students were not required to include information about why the delay occurs. So you don't have to talk about the delayed release of melatonin and all that stuff. You did have to talk about what do we mean by sleep-wake cycle shift. It means that the adolescent is going to have difficulty falling asleep at night, and falling asleep at night is also known as a special word called sleep onset. Okay, so if you say difficulties with sleep onset, it's basically the same as saying difficulty in falling asleep. Sleep onset is the onset of sleep. It's basically referring to how easily or how difficult it is for you to fall asleep. And obviously it's not just the sleep cycle shift, it's the sleep-wake cycle shift. So you have to talk about the waking part of it as well. So they're also going to have difficulty waking up in the morning, okay, as their body clock or as their circadian rhythm has changed from childhood. So that's all you really need to include. And that would be 2 marks there. So hopefully that makes sense. And you can see that this had a pretty low average score of 0.9 out of 2, which suggests that most people would have been able to name what it was, but when it came to describing what it wasn't as well answered, okay? So hopefully all of you were able to write something similar to this that would have got you 2 marks then. Alrighty, let's keep moving on to the next question. So this is again a research methods related one. So it says predict the effect that the circadian phase disorder identified in part BI, which is the sleep-wake cycle shift. So predict the effect that the sleep-wake cycle shift would have on results of Steph's research if she added adolescents who were under the age of 18. Now remember that the original participants in Steph's study were over the age of 18. They were technically adults, okay, over the age of 18. Now you're being asked in this question to explain what would happen to the actual results of Steph's research if she was to add people that were under the age of 18 to her sample with reference to the sleep-wake cycle shift. And that's basically where the justify your response part's going to come about, justifying that in terms of the sleep-wake cycle shift. Okay, and linking it back to what effect it would have on her results. So I'm going to give you guys like 3 minutes to try doing this question now, and your time starts now. Resume recording for this one. Okay, so yeah. So with this question, all you really had to do was, look at the results and see how the results were affected. So obviously, if we're adding people under the age of 18, they're going to have sleep-wake cycle shift. And if you're going to get them to do a test at 9 a.m. in the morning, they're still going to be really sleepy. They're not going to be able to concentrate. So what that's going to mean is that the mean accuracy of letters that are identified is going to reduce, because obviously when you're sleepy in the morning, you're unable to concentrate. As an adolescent that's under the age of 18, you're not going to be as accurate in your identification of letters. Your accuracy in that cognitive task is going to decrease. Alternatively, you could say that adding adolescents under the age of 18 would lead to an increased number of errors in the letter identification task, because for the same reason, they'd be unable to concentrate and thus more likely to make errors in the letters that are identified. Okay, so that's 0.7 out of 2. So again, a low average score, but it's just a matter of reading through this question 2 or 3 times and really understanding what it's asking from you, rather than just thinking, oh my God, this is a hard question, and just leaving it blank and skipping it. Okay, always try to attempt the question, never try to leave it blank, and avoid using blanket statements. Like, don't say something like it would affect the accuracy of the results. What does that even mean? Unpack it, explain how does it affect the accuracy of the results. Link it back to the actual results that are there. Okay, link it back to the actual concepts that they ask from you in the question, like the sleep-wake cycle shift. Think about it practically. If you were in that situation as an adolescent under 18, asked to sit the test at 9 a.m., how would your performance on the test be affected? So that's essentially what this question is asking us. Alrighty. So looking at question C now, so suggest a conclusion for Steph's research. So basically what we're looking at here is talking about drawing an evidence-based conclusion, drawing a conclusion or writing up a conclusion based on the set of evidence or set of data or results that we have for this question. So I'm just going to show you guys the sample response. And it's not really that much writing if you look at it. It's just a matter of including the right components here. Number one, the first thing you always need to include in any conclusion that you write is the sample of participants. In Steph's study, in her original study, she uses people over the age of 18. So you are required to write this in your conclusion. You can either write people over the age of 18 or you can write adults, because people over the age of 18 are otherwise known as adults. Okay, both of those are fine. If you just wrote something general, like Steph could conclude that people who had 1 natural night of sleep, that's not specific. What do you mean by people? A person can be anyone. It could be of any age. You have to be specific. So if you write adults, that's fine. If you write people over the age of 18, that's fine. You get 1 mark simply for stating the sample of the participants that were in this study. You get another mark for mentioning what was actually being measured. What was the actual direction of the results? So we said people who over the age of 18 who had 1 natural night of sleep would have increased mean performance. So we're saying that there's going to be a higher level of mean performance on the letter identification task compared to people over the age of 18 who slept for only 4 hours. So that's basically our conclusion, okay? We've mentioned the experimental group and the effect of the IV, of having a natural night of sleep. We've linked this back to the results, so what it could do to the results, increase mean performance on the letter identification task. And we've brought up the control group and talked about saying compared to people over the age of 18 who slept for only 4 hours. It's not really a lot that they're expecting from you in terms of this question. You could go on to talk about the implications of the results. You could go on to talk about maybe a limitation of the results. But essentially, when they talk about conclusion, these are the 3 things you need to include. Number 1, you need to include the sample of the study, whether that's the adults, whether that's people over the age of 18. Okay, that is 1 mark. Number 2, you have to mention some kind of a direction of effect. Direction of effect means you have to say, okay, with reference to the DV, does the DV increase? Does it decrease? What happens to the actual mean performance of letter identification in this particular, from these results that were obtained? And number 3, you obviously have to talk about the relationship between the IV and the DV. So when we manipulate the IV, when we give people a whole natural night of sleep, what effect does it have on the DV? And obviously in doing this, we have to bring in the control group, which is the people over the age of 18 who slept for only 4 hours there. Okay, so that's basically 1 example of how you could write up a conclusion. The most simplest and most straightforward and easiest way to do it, in my opinion. There are also other ways you can talk about a control group, talk about a conclusion here. And they are on the next page. Now, it's important to mention, to talk about this, that the fact that last year, a lot of students wrote the conclusion as a hypothesis. Although the hypothesis kind of contains the same components talking about the IV and its effect on the DV, it's still a hypothesis at the end of the day. If you write your conclusion as a hypothesis, you are going to get 0, okay? No marks there. So be careful and read the question properly. Alrighty, so I'm going to show you guys the alternative responses that some students mentioned last year. Okay, the following are sample responses. So what our sample response was resembled more of option 2 here. Okay, this is kind of what we looked at in the previous one. There are also other alternative options that you can talk about. So you can talk about, for example, you know, the reliability of the study overall. Okay, you can talk about the fact that because Steph didn't specifically do the visual perception test with reference to driving related conditions, we can't really draw a proper conclusion based on that. Again, like I said, the most simplest one to do, straightforward, easy, is the second one here. So try to frame your conclusions in terms of these 3 components. This is the easiest way to go about it. Okay, also just be careful when you're writing. I know a lot of us in health and human and other subjects, when we're comparing data, we often use the word significantly higher, significantly lower. Avoid using the word significantly with reference to research methods, because when you use the word significantly in psychology, it is referring back to statistical significance and our p-value. And as we talked about before, the p-value is no longer examinable content. So if you use the word significantly, like in a sentence like this in psychology, it takes on a different meaning than if you used it in another subject. So do not use the word significantly. Use words like just increase, decrease, reduced, you know, those kinds of words. So just a clear direction of effect there, but avoid using words like significantly or non-significantly. Alrighty, so that brings us to the last question for this one. Now there is another research scenario. This one is taken from an older exam. I'm not going to go through this today, so I'm going to let you guys go through this in your own free time. I'll put this PowerPoint up on the school box so you can go through this. Try to see if you can answer the questions. I have included the sample responses, obviously, but try to see if you can include, if you can answer the questions like what it's asking you to do before you look at the sample response. And the best way to do that is open it up in PowerPoint, like how I've done now in like slideshow mode, and just like go through the slides like this. And then write your answer and then just click the space bar and the model answer will come up. Okay, that's the best way to go about it. So I'll let you guys do this one as a practice question and you can self-assess that. Now, there was another research scenario that I wanted to go through, but before we go through that, are there any topics that you guys are confused about or you guys want me to explain with reference to research methods? No? Okay, cool. It's good that you guys are good with research methods. Okay, this is the last one I want to go through. And if you guys are like, you know, if you've got another meeting with another teacher or anything like that, you're free to leave at this point and you can just re-listen to the recording. But if you're all good and you want to do another research scenario example, we can stay on. We'll probably get this done within the next 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, so yeah, this is just a research scenario and it talks about, I hope everyone can see what I've shared. Yeah, okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to zoom this in so it's easier for everyone to see. So this one is taken from VCAR 2012. Obviously, the questions have been modified to fit with our study design, but the research scenario is very relevant for us, okay, specifically because we did specific phobia. Yes, we will go through sampling procedures after I finish with this one. I haven't forgotten about that. Yep, we'll do. Okay, so it says, Dr. Theo works as a research psychologist. He conducted a study to test the effectiveness of systematic desensitization as a treatment for the specific phobia of snakes. 20 otherwise healthy adults with a specific phobia of snakes were selected for the study. Prior to taking part, each participant was assessed to ensure they fulfilled the diagnostic criteria, that is the key symptoms for specific phobia of snakes. Dr. Theo used an independent groups design. Half of the participants received the treatment of systematic desensitization. The other half did not receive any treatment at all. At the end of the research, the participants were again assessed on diagnostic criteria for specific phobia of snakes. The results are printed in the table below and they've given us a table. So pre-treatment is before the systematic desensitization, post-treatment is after the systematic desensitization. Obviously, condition 1 will be before and after. Condition 2 didn't receive any treatment. So you can see that their results have stayed the same, which makes sense. So if we're looking at constructing a research hypothesis for this study, we're basically looking at those main variables there. So we're looking at the IV, we're looking at the population, we're looking at the operationalizing of variables and the DV. So I'm going to give you guys like about 2 minutes to write a possible research hypothesis for this particular research study. So 2 minutes on the clock and your time starts now. So to that one. Okay, so just looking at the population, which is healthy adults diagnosed with specific phobia. The systematic desensitization is our IV, and the DV is going to be the patient numbers in post-treatment stage. And we're hypothesizing or predicting that healthy adults who use systematic desensitization, their numbers, their patient numbers are going to decrease. And that's kind of what the results have proven, not proven, sorry, that's not a word I should ever use. That's what the results have kind of supported, okay? When we look at the results, we can see that we started with 10 participants who had specific phobias before using systematic desensitization. After treatment or after systematic desensitization, that number dropped to 4. So basically that means that 6 participants were cured or were treated successfully and were able to overcome their specific phobia of snakes. Okay, so anyway, the next one, Dr. Theo needed to ensure that before commencing the study, his participants had met the diagnostic criteria. Now it says identify any one key symptom or diagnostic criteria for specific phobia. Now this is an easy question. I still want you guys to try it out because it is a content-based question. So I'm going to literally give you only 30 seconds to do this one because it's just about giving me one symptom or one criteria we would use to diagnose someone with specific phobia. So 30 seconds and your time starts now. So yeah, for the previous question, you just have to identify any one key symptom. So any of these will be fine. The main ones you could talk about are basically the fear being intense or irrational, the anxiety being persistent, the person showing some kind of dysfunction, not being able to function normally in life, or the participant showing avoidance behaviors. Okay, you could also even talk about the time duration, like the anxiety symptoms persisting for about 6 months. That's also good. All right, so the next question is outline the purpose of a control group. It says participants in condition 2, the no treatment, they formed the control group for this study. Now outline the purpose of a control group as it relates to Dr. Theo's research study. So this is very important for you to be able to link back to the actual research study in question. So I'm going to give you guys about 1 minute because control group is something that a lot of you are pretty good with. So 1 minute on the clock and your time starts now. Okay, so looking at this question, it says outline the purpose of a control group. So we know that in any experiment or any research investigation, you've got two groups. One is the experimental group, one is the control group. So the control group is important for us, and you can say that in Dr. Theo's research study, the participants in condition 2 no treatment form the control group because they're not exposed to the independent variable. In this case, that means that they're not exposed to systematic desensitization. So thus, they're important for us because condition 2 participants' results would act as a baseline for comparison. So we use that to basically compare the results of the people who were in the experimental group. Okay, so that's basically 2 marks there. You get 1 mark for talking about the fact that the participants in condition 2 are not exposed to systematic desensitization, and 1 mark for explaining that they're used as a baseline for comparison of results. Okay, it doesn't have to be a word to word like what's on the screen here, but as long as you're mentioning those key ideas, you will get 2 marks there. Remember, guys, just be careful with questions like this. Sometimes it's very easy to just generally define what a control group is without relating it back to the research study. Whenever you get a research scenario and then you're asked to talk about the control group, even if it doesn't say something like as it relates to Dr. Theo's research study, even if it just says outline the purpose of the control group, it's better that you link it back to the study given, because a lot of the time that is what is expected from you, okay? Unless the question is just a standalone question, not attached to any scenario, then it's okay. But it's very rare to get a question like that that's not connected to a research scenario. Alrighty, so almost done. And the last question that we're looking at is evaluate Dr. Theo's research study in terms of any potential confounding variables, which may have affected his ability to generalize his findings. So in this question now, you're looking back to Dr. Theo's research study and thinking of any potential confounding variables that could have affected his ability to generalize his results. So I'm just going to show you guys the sample response for this because I don't want to keep you guys for too long. Let me do that again. Okay. So obviously, because it's worth 4 marks, you're expected to talk about 2 potential confounding variables or limitations or whatever. Okay, so basically, you get 2 marks for talking about each one. So obviously, it needs to be in some level of detail there. You can't just state it in a few words, you have to talk about it. These are a few examples. Now, number 1, the participants in Dr. Theo's study, the sample size, in other words, is quite small. So obviously there's a lot of room for individual participant differences, particularly because he does use an independent groups design as well. So this is going to be a problem because we might have 10 participants who start off with specific phobia, but one of them is on the very extreme scale. One of them has very mild specific phobia. So it's not fair to have participants who have different levels of specific phobia. We need to make sure that they are as similar to each other as possible. Dr. Theo's sampling technique is not also 100% clear. So it says that they were selected, but it doesn't say how they were selected, okay? There's no indication there that it was random sampling. So there might be some clue there that it was convenient sampling instead, because it says they were selected by Dr. Theo. It doesn't indicate any random sampling. So if Dr. Theo did well and truly use convenient sampling, then it wouldn't allow him to generalize his results back to the population. And we know this because obviously not every participant would have had an equal chance of being selected. Finally, you can also talk about lack of debriefing. So obviously systematic desensitization is quite a traumatic procedure for somebody with specific phobia to go through. So obviously, there's no indication in the scenario that Dr. Theo sat down with the participants after the study, talked to them, referred them to a psychologist or counseling service. This is a problem because it shows that Dr. Theo doesn't really care about the well-being and welfare of his participants because he hasn't really properly debrief them after the study was complete. Okay, and that's an ethical principle. And remember, you can talk about ethical principles under limitations, and ethical principles do affect your ability to generalize results. So there could be a number of other various responses you could come up with for this question, but these are just 4 examples there. Okay. Alrighty, and the last question is drawing on the results obtained, form a conclusion for Dr. Theo's research study. So again, remembering that we need to include this name of the sample. In our conclusion, we have to include the direction of effect, so whether the DV is increasing or decreasing, and we need to include some mention of the IV there as well. So I'll just show you guys the sample response here. So I've just written, Dr. Theo's research study demonstrated that the use of systematic desensitization led to a decrease in the number of specific phobia patients. So again, we're talking about the direction of effect here, that the number of patients are decreasing. So 10 participants in the pre-treatment was lowered to 4 participants in post-treatment. So what does this show us? This shows us that specific phobia patients should incorporate more psychological evidence-based interventions, such as systematic desensitization, rather than relying on biological treatments like anti-anxiety medication by itself or alone. Okay, so that's basically how the conclusion would work for this kind of a scenario here. All right, so there's a lot more research scenarios you can look at in the older exams. And, you know, if you go to past VCA, like older VCA exams pre-2017, you can find multiple choices. Those are really quick ways of assessing your knowledge of research methods. There was also in exams from 2011 to 2016, they had a section C, and that section C was almost always research methods. So you can go through those. And if you're really going to dig back into the ancient archives of VCA exams, you can actually look at 2002 to 2010. And within those exams, you'd have to look at exam 2, okay? Because back in those days, they had 2 exams for psychology. All right, so that's basically if you don't have checkpoints on you or you don't have many study guides, these are other resources that you can simply just find online. Again, it's always best for us to use VCA resources. We do use company ones as well, but VCA are always the most indicative of what the actual exam will be like. Okay, so also on that note, this question that I just showed you is actually taken from kind of like a booklet of exam revision research methods questions. We did give this to you at the beginning of the year, but probably it's somewhere in the Schoolbox archives. So I will post this up again. This will have the solutions. So maybe just try to hide the solutions, work on it yourself, and then use the solutions to check your answers. Okay, so I will put this up on Schoolbox as well, so you get a better practice. Yeah, okay, so I will I'll just stop the recording here.